Canto 6. Summary. In what is the longest uninterrupted speech in the entire comedy, the soul of Justinian answers the pilgrim's two questions from the end of the previous canto. He first describes how the Emperor Constantine moved the seat of the Roman Empire east to Constantinople. This was the opposite direction Aeneas took when he left Troy, the location of which was near the new imperial capital. Over 200 years after Constantine, the standard of the eagle, a constant subject throughout this canto, representing authority and rule, came in the 6th century to the hands of Justinian. He began his rule as an Arian, meaning that he did not believe in the divine nature of Christ. Pope Agapetus, however, corrected this heresy in the emperor, who followed after his orthodox teaching. Now in heaven he sees the mystery of the God-man more clearly. He briefly describes what he is most renowned for, the purging and codifying of Roman law. Handing over the command of the army to Belisarius, Justinian retired to focus entirely on his legal task. Thus ends the answer to Dante's first question. But he is not content to let it stand there. He must speak to how the rise and triumph of the Roman Empire has led to the woes Dante himself is suffering in the present day, namely the conflict between the Guelphs, those fighting against the sacred standard, and the Ghibellines, those grasping it. He then traces the journey of that standard from the moment Pallas fell, an act of self-sacrifice that allowed Aeneas to conquer the Latins and thus establish the Roman people, through its days under the 7 kings, through the age of the Republic, and into the Pax Romana. Justinian pays special attention to the days of the 3rd Caesar, Tiberius, during whose reign God wreaked vengeance for his wrath. This is an indirect reference to the crucifixion of Christ in 33 AD. This is followed by the reference to Titus, under whose command Jerusalem fell in 70 AD, which Justinian calls vengeance for the vengeance. This becomes an important point of discussion between Beatrice and Dante in the following canto. Finally, he ends his history with Charlemagne, jumping over 700 years of history, who succored the church when it was persecuted by the Lombards. At this point, he is able to return to his condemnation of the 2 factions at war in Italy during this time. The Guelphs, of whom Dante was a prominent leader in 1300, set the fleurs-de-lis, literally yellow lilies, at odds with the standard of the empire. This French symbol is a reference to the forces belonging to Charles II of Naples, who was the leader of the Guelphs at this time. It is this Charles who is referenced a few lines down from this indictment. The Ghibellines, on the other hand, in favor of the Holy Roman Emperor in Germany, taking control of Italy's many city-states, are said to take the sacred standard for their own party. In short, Justinian lays the blame for Italy's political unrest at the feet of both parties. Both Guelphs and Ghibellines are at fault for the evil Dante sees, and both need to change their ways. In the final few stanzas, Justinian describes the nature of this second realm, populated by those for whom temporary earthly honor and glory were more important than it should have been. When that happened, the rays of true love, i.e., love for God, were deviated and therefore burned with less ardor. This excess of love for earthly honor locates them here, though not punitively, in the sphere of Mercury. Justinian then finishes his speech with a description of one of the souls in the sphere, the humble saintly pilgrim Romeo of Villeneuve. Canto 6. Mercury. After Constantine turned the eagle back against the path of heaven, following the ancient one who took Lavinia, 200 years and more the bird of God kept itself on the outskirts of Europe, close to the mountains from which it first left. And beneath the shade of its sacred wings, it there governed the world from hand to hand, and in so changing, it came into mine. Caesar I was, and am Justinian, who, by the will of the first love I feel, withdrew from the laws the excess and vain. And before I was awake to the work, I believed Christ had one nature, no more, and with such a faith I was contented. But the blessed Agapetus, who was the greatest of shepherds, directed me with his teaching to the authentic faith. I believed him, and what was in his faith I now see so clearly, just as you see all contradictions have both false and true. As soon as I moved my feet with the church, it was pleasing to God to inspire me to the high task, and I gave it my all. To Belisarius I gave the arms, with whom heaven's right hand was so conjoined it was a sign I ought to take my rest. Now here my answer to your first question is ended, but its conditions press me to follow after it with something more, so that you may see with how much reason one crosses the sacred standard, either by grasping it or fighting against it. See how much virtue has made it worthy of reverence, beginning from the hour that Pallas died to give it sovereignty. You know it took Alba for its dwelling, for 300 years and more, till the end when the 3 with 3 fought for it again. You know what it did under 7 kings, from Sabine evil to Lucretia's woe, conquering all of the nearby peoples. You know what, with august Romans beneath, it did against Brennus, against Pyrrhus, against other princes and republics. Whence Torquatus and Quintius, so named for his unkept ringlets, the Decii, Fabii, have fame I gladly preserve. It cast down the hubris of the Arabs who followed behind as Hannibal passed through Alpine rocks, from which you, Poe, descend. Beneath it triumphed youthful Scipio and Pompey, which seem bitter to those hills of Fuseliae beneath which you were born. Then, drawing near the time all heaven willed to bring the world into its state serene, Caesar, by the will of Rome, took it up. And what it did from the Var to the Rhine, the Isere, Loire, and the Seine each saw, and every valley whence the Rhone is filled. What it did then as it left Ravenna and crossed the Rubicon was such a flight that neither tongue nor pen could follow it. It turned the martial multitude toward Spain, toward Durazzo, and struck Pharsalia, such that the grief was felt by the hot Nile. It saw Antandros and the Simois, from which it came, once more where Hector lies, and then shook itself to Ptolemy's woe. From there it descended, smiting Juba, and there it turned into your western lands, where it heard the Pompeian trumpet sound. For what it did with the bearer after, both Brutus and Cassius below in hell, and Modena and Perugia both grieve. Wretched Cleopatra weeps for it still, who, fleeing before it, took from the serpent an evil and instantaneous death. With him it coursed unto the Red Sea shore. With him the world was placed in so much peace the temple of Janus was bolted shut. But what the standard that leads me to speak had done before, or was about to do, in the mortal realm subjected to it, becomes in appearance small and obscure, if one sees it with clear eye and pure love, there within the hand of the third Caesar. For the living justice that inspires me bestowed upon his hand of whom I speak the glory to wreak vengeance for his wrath. Now wonder here in that which I unfold. With Titus it then coursed to wreak vengeance for the vengeance wreaked on the ancient sin. And when the Holy Church was bit by teeth from Lombardy, Charlemagne succored her beneath his wings, reigning victorious. And now you are able to pass judgment on those I accused before, on their faults, that are the reason for all your evil. One sets the state's standard and the fleur-de-lis at odds. One takes it for his own party. It is difficult to see who fails more. Let Ghibellines beneath another flag ply their arts, for he ill follows this one always, who separates it from justice. And let not this new Charles overthrow it with his Guelphs, but let him fear the talons which have drawn the hides from greater lions. Many times before now have children wept the faults of their fathers. Let none believe that God exchanges arms for those lilies. This little star furnishes itself with those righteous spirits who had been active so that honor and fame might follow them. And when desires are set upon these things, thus deviating, the rays of true love must therefore fly upwards with less ardor. But the fittingness of our recompense to our merit is part of our gladness, for we see it neither as more nor less. Therefore this living justice so sweetens in our affections that we can never be turned aside to any wickedness. Just as different voices make music sweet, so too different stations in our life here render sweet harmony between these wheels. And within the present pearl shines the light of Romeo, whose great and beautiful labors were underappreciated. But the Provençals who worked against him have no laughter, therefore he journeys ill who thinks another's good deed does him wrong. Raymond Berenger had his 4 daughters, and each one a queen. Romeo did this for him, a humble man and a pilgrim. When Raymond was moved by malicious words to demand an account from this just man, who rendered him 7 and 5 for 10, Romeo took his leave, both old and poor. And if the world could know the heart he had, begging his life from threadbare to threadbare, though praising him much, it would praise him more.